Continuing our training camp battles series, who should be the starting four for the Kings on opening night? Keegan Murray, the rookie and fourth overall pick, or someone with NBA experience in Trey Lyles? Brenden Nunes joins me to break it down right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports reporter and producer at ABC 10 News. If you missed the first part of our training camp battles series where Brenden and I discussed Malik Monk versus Kevin Huerter for the starting two-guard spot, go and check that out and have a couple more training camp battles episodes coming for you later on this week, which I'm excited about. But this one is a big one, although you might not think so. I know a lot of Sacramento Kings fans just believe, hey, Keegan Murray was your fourth overall pick. He should be the starting four. He is the future starting four for the Sacramento Kings. Why not just put him into the starting lineup on opening night? But it's a genuine question. It's a legitimate question for Mike Brown to ask whether or not he wants to give his rookie time to acclimate himself to the game off the bench and start someone in Trey Lyles, who at least we know has NBA experience and can be effective at least holding that spot down while Keegan gets more comfortable. And a lot of this has to do with the Sacramento Kings trying to get off to a good start and not drop too many games early. Does Trey Lyles give the Kings a better chance to win early on while Keegan goes through the growing pains so that he can come into a team that's hopefully not 3 or 4 games under 500? We'll have to wait and see. But for now, Brenden and I break down this argument, break down this debate, and we'll share with you who we're picking to start at the 4 spot. Brenden, one of the things I'm most excited about, not just for this training camp, but for this season, is to see my guy, Keegan Murray, playing with De'Aaron Fox, with Domantas Sabonis, with the main roster. We know through the draft process how big I was on Keegan Murray. You were a fan of Keegan Murray's, but you, like so many other people, were like, maybe the Kings could go in different directions. Ultimately, you, like so many others, are excited by the selection of Keegan Murray. And more importantly, I think we're all excited by the fit of Keegan Murray in Sacramento. The Kings believe he was both the best fit and best player available. He'll get an opportunity to prove that right away. But if you're going to be the best fit in Sacramento, theoretically, you're going to be starting right away. But that's always a question mark with a rookie. So really the battle in training camp, I think, is Keegan Murray versus Trey Lyles. And the battle is not who's going to be the better player, because I think we all know it's going to be Keegan Murray. The battle is, who do you start to open up this season? Who gives you the best chance to win at that starting 4 spot? Do you go with someone like Lyles, who's been there before, did really well for the Sacramento Kings as a starter last season, who can kind of hold that spot down while Keegan gets used to the NBA? Or do you go with the rookie right away and say, hey, we believe that he can fit in there? Let's start with Keegan Murray, Brenden. First thing that comes to your mind when making an argument for Keegan Murray being the starter on game 1 is what?
I think that it's just getting him acclimated to the NBA as quick as possible. Like, I get that it's all about wins right now. I've been one to say that I wouldn't be shocked if there was a little bit of a learning curve and adjustment period to a new offense and Mike Brown, a new coaching staff, a decent amount of turnover with this roster as well. But obviously the Kings are in a spot where there's not much wiggle room when it comes to competing for the postseason and the play-in. And I think that's going to be a really tight race. So going 3 of 7 at the beginning of the year or winning 5 of your first 15 games is just not as easy to just write off to a new system when you're in a close race like this. But I think that there's more value in getting Keegan Murray those reps and allowing him to get comfortable as quick as possible. I think it will be more beneficial for the long term. And I think that a lot of it has to do with, like, I just think he's already a ready player. You know, I'm probably, maybe it's irresponsible of me to say that when we haven't seen him play in the NBA and you never know how it's actually going to translate for these guys. But Keegan just gets everything within the flow of the offense. You know what I mean? Even this is what we saw at Iowa. This is what we saw at Summer League. Sure, you're running plays for him, but it's not a play where the ball needs to be in his hands. It's if that option is available, then great, get it to him and he'll make something happen. I just think that Keegan is a guy that coming out of the draft, you viewed as probably the most NBA ready player in that 2022 draft. And I think that the fact that I'm confident in his immediate production, I think paired with it being beneficial to his long-term future and getting acclimated to the NBA as quick as possible is what the main thing that sticks out to me with Keegan as a starter.
Well, one of the things you said there where I feel you hit the nail on the head is, and draft scouts and draft labels are always a crapshoot because we've seen plenty of them be wrong, but Keegan was labeled the most NBA ready prospect in this draft. And if the most NBA ready prospect can't make the starting lineup, then what the hell are we talking about? Why are we even discussing that? Like that, at that point, it's just he's a rookie that we think can be successful in the NBA, but not right away. Like, so NBA ready prospect to me means someone who can come in and not just start on a bad team. Because look, Paolo Banchero is going to start for the Orlando Magic, right? He's going to probably put up close to like 25, 26 points per game. He's going to be really good and put up great numbers. The Orlando Magic are probably going to be pretty bad, although I like what I've seen from Franz Wagner in Germany. But I really think that his ability to just fit, his ability to flow, how much sense it makes. Like when we were going into the offseason, one of the reasons why I love Keegan Murray so much, and I always get in trouble with like the fit versus best talent available argument right around draft time. But I was going into the offseason, I was thinking, I wrote a checklist, like what, like the main boxes that the Kings would love to check for someone who fits in that starting 4 spot next to Fox and Sabonis. It was floor spacer, high basketball IQ, and defensive player, someone who a wing player who can space the floor, who plays good defense, and who is smart and knows how to fit in. And I feel like Keegan Murray checks all of those boxes right away, even before playing a single NBA minute. And it's that high basketball IQ that I think is what makes up the gap of, okay, he hasn't had any playing time in the NBA, but he knows how to play basketball. He knows how to fit. And there's going to be so much attention on those other 2 guys, plus a Herter or Monk, plus a Harrison Barnes, that I think he doesn't need the time off the bench to figure it out. He can still figure it out while being a starter and not hurting the Kings in any kind of way. I can't see a scenario where Keegan Murray starting hurts the Sacramento Kings.
I agree. And it also has to do with, like, I don't think there's substantially better options in my mind. I think it maybe is different. Like, it's very different than the Bagley situation, right? With Bielitsa. Like, was Bielitsa a head and shoulders better player? Probably not. But Bagley was already viewed as a very raw prospect that was going to take time, and Bielitsa was the clear better fit. Like, we're going to get to Trey Lyles, but they have similar play styles offensively. And it's not like Lyles is bringing you an amazing amount on the defensive end. So I definitely agree with you. And I think for Keegan to have been so efficient during his time in college as one of the leading scorers in the country, 23 points a game, and he's still 55% from the field, just under 40% from 3. And like that 55% from the field when you're shooting almost 5 threes a game is ridiculous. And he'd have even less focus on him in Sacramento. I think that he's the 4th, maybe 5th option on an offense. And I think that when you're talking of that sort of responsibility, I think is something that is reasonable to expect to go all right at the NBA level. But my question for you, Matt, what would concern you the most? Like, what aspect of Keegan's game would you worry about the most at the beginning of his NBA career?
I think it's the same thing that worries me the most with this entire Kings team, and I think it's defensively. Like, I think Keegan has the capabilities to be a solid defender, but is the speed of the game defensively maybe a little too much for him? Is he able to stick with some of the faster 4s? Because a lot of 4s could play 3 in the modern NBA. Or can he handle some of the more physical 4s in the NBA? Like, if the Sacramento Kings play the Los Angeles Lakers early in the season, which they will, like, is Keegan Murray guarding LeBron James in that spot? Is LeBron the 4 that he's facing on a nightly basis? Now the Kings might want to switch him off of LeBron, but can Keegan take on that challenge? The 4, like when they play the Milwaukee Bucks, Giannis Antetokounmpo might be playing kind of that 4 spot. Can he handle that? Or can he handle, if he's guarding the 3, can he handle a Chris Middleton? Like there's that 4 spot defensively, I think is going to ask a lot of questions of Keegan Murray right away. So that might be concerning. But going back to your point about the other options, do I trust Trey Lyles to guard LeBron or Giannis better than I would trust Keegan Murray, who I think is slimmer and potentially quicker? Not really.
Yeah, definitely agree with you. And I think that having Harrison Barnes there as a safer option when it comes to guarding some of those bigger wings that the Kings are going to have to deal with far too often, I think, for their liking in the Western Conference. And obviously, there's guys in the East that fit that bill as well. But Kawhi Leonard and a Paul George, like Keegan's going to have to take on one of those. You mentioned LeBron, like AD plays the 4 for that team sometimes too.
That's true.
And I don't know what the heck that would look like from Sacramento's point of view. Maybe that's a time where you feel like Sabonis and Holmes is an answer, even though I don't love it. So I think that defensively is where it's going to be an interesting question. And it'll be really interesting to see if they do have Keegan in that starting lineup or just when he's out there alongside Harrison and you're talking about a Kawhi Leonard or a LeBron James, like who do they give that responsibility to? Because I would guess that HB is a better option right now, but I'm not sure that it's a ginormous difference between HB and Keegan. And I think that getting those reps and a lot of it is less of like learning in game in my mind and more of just having the ability to go back and watch that film of how he guarded that guy and figuring out the best ways to move forward so that way he can be better in that aspect throughout his career. So I totally agree with you defensively. I think the one other thing that's going to be interesting to me, because I think he's going to be a really good 3-point shooter. Like we've seen that, already saw it at Summer League as well. And I guess Summer League has an asterisk on it, understandably so, but he was legitimately phenomenal out there. The only time that it was debatable if he was the best player was when he was playing against Paulo Banchero, right, which says something. And it's a debate. I think that you could totally make the argument that Keegan was better in that game. And I think he's going to be really good in transition. Like Monty highlighted in that presser right after the draft that dunking is a big thing for Keegan. And it's not for like flashiness, like I talked about with De'Aaron in one of our previous episodes of like that getting the crowd going. It's just that is the most efficient shot at basketball, right? Keegan has ridiculous length in transition. He has, I think, good top speed. His acceleration isn't phenomenal or anything or a first step, but I think when he's got a head of steam going downhill with his size and his length, and I think finishing ability with both hands, right? He shoots as a righty, writes as a lefty. He's a little bit ambidextrous. I've seen some people try to point out that he's maybe a better finisher with his left, which is something I'm going to be watching for a little bit. I think that in transition, he's going to be really good. It'll be interesting in the half court for me, where if guys close out really hard, is he able to kind of put the ball on the deck and make decisions from there? And that's going to be I just think another learning curve. There's always going to be learning curves with rookies. Guys usually don't come in just killing everything right away. I think there's going to be some maybe eye roll moments that are frustrating, but It's to be expected with rookies.
You said Summer League has an asterisk with it, and you're right. But let me share with you why I am putting so much stock into Keegan Murray's Summer League, and you can tell me if I'm putting too much into it or not. The reason why I love what Keegan was able to do so much in Summer League, it wasn't the fact that he was the Summer League MVP. It wasn't the fact that he hit that big shot against Paolo Banchero in Orlando. It wasn't the fact that he, I thought, completely outplayed Chet Holmgren. It was how Keegan Murray consistently played throughout the entire Summer League, including the California Classic. Every single game except one, he scored 20 or more points, and he did so without dominating the ball. Like the one thing that stood out to me when we were there watching Paolo versus Keegan, Paolo was touching the ball, almost bringing the ball up the floor every single possession. There were times where we were frustrated that Keegan wasn't getting the ball enough, and he was still averaging 20 plus points per game. Keegan did everything he did over the course of summer in the flow of an offense, playing a lot off the ball against with a team of guys that are all worse than him. So if he's able to fit into a flow of an offense and play the same way with a group of NBA hopefuls that he can play with stars in Fox and Sabonis, moving off the ball, taking the shots that come to him, being a poacher on the perimeter, attacking the basket when needing to, getting out in transition, helping with rebounding, helping with defense. These are all things that I expect Keegan Murray to be able to do right away that he doesn't have to develop. and he's already shown that he can fit with an offense, and he's going to go to a better offense in theory with Fox and Sabonis. Like, I think if he's able to, I'm not expecting 20 points per game from Keegan Murray as a rookie and for him to do that on opening night against Portland, but he showed that he's capable of doing it based off of how well he fit in with a lesser group, to be brutally unfair, or to be brutally fair, even though I you know what you're getting in summer league, right? You know what you're getting with that roster. I was just really impressed with how Keegan fit with the flow of an offense, and I expect that to translate immediately when he's playing next to Fox and Sabonis, who are going to command so much attention.
I agree with you. Summer league was really big for me and kind of like how I viewed Keegan. And again, maybe I'm putting too much stock into it, but I think that the reasons you pointed out, like, I think summer league is better talent than what he was dealing with in college, but it's just more of a mess, right? These guys haven't been together that long. And the fact that Keegan's putting up numbers so naturally within the flow of an offense that like doesn't really quite exist all that much, to be honest. Like, what is the flow of an offense that's like been together for like 2-3 weeks?
Right.
So I think that being able to come into a brand new offensive scheme and have that type of production in the one game that he doesn't put up 20, I think was that second Cal Classic game. And Jordi Fernandez is talking about, who was lead assistant now and was head coach of that summer league team, was talking about how he just felt like Keegan was just trying to get everybody else involved a little bit, which is like the best possible reason to not put up those type of numbers.
Right.
So I think that just seeing him, do that so naturally in a brand new offense gives me a lot of optimism that he'll be pretty productive on the offensive end early on. And there were flashes of more self-creation than I think that I expected. There were 2 back-to-back possessions in that Indiana game that were pretty crazy self-creation moments.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by BetOnline.net, your number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports information this season. You can find all the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this year's opening weeks of games. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And of course, it's not just football. Great basketball, NBA, college betting out there for you. Some great fun Sacramento Kings betting. Now, you can't bet on who's going to get the starting spot between Keegan Murray and Trey Lyles, but you can bet on Keegan Murray to win NBA Rookie of the Year, and I think he has a legitimate spot. He has, I think, top 3 odds now with what happened with Chet Holmgren and his injury in Oklahoma City. So maybe put some money on that, and when Keegan wins Rookie of the Year, we get to enjoy it from the Kings' perspective, and your wallet gets to enjoy it as well. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MLB baseball, MMA, boxing, even golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. Building the argument for Trey Lyles. I don't think it's the easiest thing in the world. It's certainly not the most popular argument, but I think the best argument that you can build is trust. We've seen it before. Even if we got a small sample size with Trey Lyles at the end of last season, granted, the Kings were terrible at the end of last season. They weren't really playing for much. It was after the trade deadline, and Lyles put up some good numbers and played well for Sacramento. Can Mike Brown trust, or will Mike Brown choose to trust a player who he's seen do it before at the NBA level to at least hold the spot to help the Kings get off to a better start than they would potentially losing games while letting a rookie stretch his legs?
Yeah, I think trust is definitely the thing to highlight here. I think similarly to kind of what we laid out in the Monk and Herter episode that we did, is that like, what you're getting from Lyles every single night. There might be aspects of that game that you don't like you're getting it every single night, but it's there every single night. Like, I think that that you're getting a very good 3-point shooter, even if the numbers don't look amazing all the time. During the 24 games he spent with Sacramento last year, it was 36.5% from 3. He's a career 33% shooter. I think he's better than those numbers would kind of lead people to believe. And I think that he's good at putting the ball on the floor, attacking closeouts, and he's got this like almost slow-mo Kyle Anderson-esque game to him where I think there is decent decision making on the offensive end. Maybe pump fakes a little bit too often, but like, I think that if you're getting moments where Keegan is overwhelmed by the NBA game, like Lyles already knows what to expect, obviously, at this point in his career. And I think that just having that value of knowing what you're getting on a nightly basis and just being a really smart player, I think him cutting off of Domas. I mean, I think there's a lot of players on this team that are going to benefit playing with Domas, obviously, but I think specifically the really high IQ offensive players, and I think Lyles falls into that as a good shooter who also will be able to take advantage and cut at the right times, even if he doesn't have great athleticism. I just think the timing of that and being able to move the ball within the flow of the offense, like, again, I think the main argument in my mind for Lyles is what you're getting.
I've spent a lot of time thinking about bench units when thinking about these training camp battles, and you don't want to handicap your starting lineup in order to bolster your bench necessarily. For the Monk and Herter episode, we talked about how Monk's ability as a scorer might give him might be more of an advantage off the bench than it would be in the starting lineup. And I started thinking about kind of the same thing with Keegan Murray. Like, okay, Keegan Murray might be better as a scorer for Sacramento off the bench than he would be as a starter. But then I started thinking about it more with Trey Lyles, and I thought about what he was able to do and how he was able to get his points at the end of last season. He was scoring a lot around the basket. He had the ball in his hands a lot more than he normally would because, again, it was the end of a lost season. I think Trey Lyles is capable of, if you need to get a bucket anywhere around the rim with that second unit, whether he's playing with Davion, playing with Malik, whoever he's playing with, I think Trey Lyles can be effective both as a floor spacer and as someone who can go inside and maybe get you some second chance points or things like that too. So I think it's a very different argument here versus like with the starting two guard spot, that I don't know if Trey Lyles has an advantage off the bench or advantage as a starter, if it's that big of a difference. But I think Trey provides value in whatever rotational spot he's in.
I agree. And I think that, like, Trey is a really good rebounder. And part of me wonders if there's an aspect of Keegan coming off the bench gives him the advantage of, like, okay, just watch Trey and see what he does. Man, we want you to do that role. And because I think that they do play the same role. It's just that the production would look very different. And I think that maybe getting more opportunities to self-create or take advantage of that, I think is definitely, like, Keegan is better, right? But I think when it comes to the roles that they'll have playing alongside Fox and Sabonis and these other guys, that I think they could be similar. And I think there could be a benefit of letting Keegan watch Trey at the beginning and get a feel for it that way. And maybe that could just happen when he goes to the bench and then watching Trey from there, or maybe that just happens in the film room post games after all this. But I think that there is an argument there where just allow Keegan to kind of witness the beginning of games. That way he's not completely caught off guard by these things.
The biggest question I have with this, Brenden, is I am of the belief that the Kings have to get off to a good start. I'm of the belief that if they want any chance of making the playoffs, not just the play-in, making the playoffs, like we're talking like a top 6 seed, which is going to be the absolute cap, I think, for this team is like a 6th or 5th seed. And that's almost a perfect season for them, essentially, is getting off to a good start. But you look at their schedule, they get the Warriors 3 times in the first month. That might be an advantage to some people. That might be a disadvantage to some people. You look at the Kings schedule and go, wow, the Kings could get off to a like 3-10 start easy based off of the opponents that they're facing and the quality of opponents that they're facing. So how much of an effect is who gives you a better opportunity to win right out of the gate? How much does that affect this conversation? Is it a major deal, a difference or major deal? Is it a minor deal, or is it not really significant when you're talking about Keegan Murray versus Trey Lyles, one giving the Kings a better chance to win right out of the gate over the other?
I think that where the Kings' reality lies with this and my personal opinion is different. I think that it's more important to get Keegan as much reps as possible and comfortable in this, even if that means growing pains. I think that the reality of the situation they're in with Monty McNair, Wes Wilcox, and this front office being on an expiring deal and clearly putting all their eggs into this one basket of making the postseason right now, that maybe they don't have that luxury. I think that there's a decent chance that like where maybe that Mike Brown could prefer to play Keegan for his long-term production, but the front office, because I'm assuming there's going to be conversations between front office, coaching staff, and all this, is like, listen, we need you to put out there whoever's going to win as many games as possible right now. And I don't think that there's a clear answer to that. I think that that's something that they'll get a better feel for after training camp and see how these guys kind of all mesh together. But I personally would put Keegan out there and have him work through growing pains. I think that it could be a weird scenario, and this is all person to person, of if you put Keegan out there and it doesn't look great, then after 5 games, we're switching to Trey Lyles. I think that could just be weird for somebody's confidence. But again, that's all person to person and personality based. I think that working through it, I'm kind of expecting a slow start. And maybe that's just because I feel like it's easier to expect something worse and then be happy when they overperform rather than the vice versa that I've kind of gotten accustomed to with this Sacramento team. But I certainly understand why they don't exactly have that luxury of these growing pains. So I think that it's just something that they're really going to have to get a feel for throughout training camp.
We've both pretty clearly given away throughout the course of this conversation who we would pick for the opening night roster. But just to reiterate it and set it in stone here at the end of this conversation, Keegan Murray is the guy for me. I think you drafted him because he's the most NBA ready player. I think it's time for him to prove immediately that he's an NBA ready player. What he did in summer league, I think translates right away to being in the starting lineup. He doesn't have to come in as a starter and save a franchise like a Paolo or a Chet or maybe even a Jabari has to do in Houston, or like a Jaden Ivey might have to do in Detroit. I think right away, Keegan Murray can come in, be himself, and himself is already immediately valuable to the Sacramento Kings. So Keegan Murray is my starting 4 on opening night. And look, if Mike Brown decides to go with Trey Lyles, the only thing I want out of it is an explanation. If Mike can take the podium before opening night or after opening night and just say, hey, we're going with this because I trust him more. We want Keegan to stretch his legs a little bit more, whatever. Just give me a reason. Don't give a cookie cutter answer. If you give me a reason, I trust it. I respect it. I accept it from Mike Brown.
Absolutely. I tried to do the same thing with the Keegan decision, right? I was clearly an Ivy guy when it comes to that, but as long as I can see their logic, I'm fine with it. Even if I disagree with it, I will choose to understand their logic until it gets proven right or wrong and just ride with it. So as long as I get that explanation, I am fine. I am fine with it as well. I lean Keegan, like you said, as I probably gave away throughout the course of this conversation. But it'll be interesting to see. I pretty strongly lean Keegan. I think that there's I can't remember the last time, and I haven't been in Sacramento media as long as yourself and some of the other people, but I can't remember the last time that a Kings lottery pick came into a roster and you could comfortably say they're in a really good position to succeed. And I think that's absolutely the case with Keegan. He's not going to be asked to, like you said, be a primary guy like some of these 3 players that were picked before him. I think that having these other creators around him, and if you're just talking about him as a 4th, 5th option on offense, that like this is the ideal scenario for him to succeed. Last question I have for you, Matt, on this is, if Keegan's in the starting lineup, like we both seem to prefer, and HB is beside him, who do you give the tougher defensive assignment to when it comes to some of these more talented wings in the Western Conference?
It's a fantastic question, and I think it's HB because I've seen it before, and I don't believe HB's defensive numbers last year are indicative of the defensive player that he is. I think HB needs to revitalize himself at all. Him playing in a contract year, I expect better from HB, period, just because he's in a contract year and he's playing for his next team and what I believe is going to be his final major contract in the NBA. That's number 1. Number 2, I have a hard time with or questioning, even though it's not an excuse necessarily, but I know HB went out there and saw who he was playing alongside and the little defensive effort they were giving on a nightly basis. And I know that had an effect on him. Again, not an excuse. HB had to be way better defensively and is supposed to be way better defensively than he was last year. What I'm saying is I think last year is the anomaly. So I've seen HB be a capable defensive player before. Don't expect him to be a lockdown defender, but I think he's capable and he's more natural at that spot. Plus I trust him more as a 4 and guarding 4s and 3s than I trust Keegan guarding 3s and 4s. So I'm going to choose HB at that spot, but I think it's a question that might change over the course of the season when we see more of Keegan and Keegan gets more used to the NBA, maybe builds an NBA body a little bit more.
I totally agree with you. I think we could even see it change throughout the course of different games. Like I think just here and there moments of like maybe HB is given the responsibility initially, but it's like coming out of a timeout, hey, Keegan, you're going to guard Braun for a couple possessions here. or
Good
HB
luck.
comes out and you have one of them. Yeah, good luck. But like, I think that ideally you need Keegan to develop into that wing stopper. And I think
Agreed.
this is where like the swing really is for me on how he will be as a player. Like, I don't know that I'm putting all too much. I think any self-creation that you get from him is just a plus. I don't know
Yes.
that I call that a swing skill, because I'm not feeling like I'm not betting on it or anything like that. I think if you don't get it, it's totally fine. I think defensively is where the swing is for me. If he can become a stopper on that end, and I think one of the best ways to develop that is to give him those reps at the beginning of his career. I certainly would be for putting him on some of those guys from the get-go, but I agree with you that like last year to me is like the definition of an anomaly for HB. I get like, no, it's not a good excuse that the other guys around you weren't good defenders, but like, is HB ever really been the personality to be that guy that takes a step back or takes his foot off the gas? Like, to me, the fact that that's happening with Harrison Barnes last year spoke to like greater issues, ridiculous issues in that locker room and like just surrounding the team. So I think that HB's engagement is, I'm expecting to totally be there this year on the defensive end. And I think he's a lot better than what we've seen. But I think that they could be kind of neck and neck in sort of their production. And I definitely probably think it's the better option to go with HB, since it's all about getting as many wins as possible right now. But I would hope that Keegan gets a couple reps like each game when they're guarding these better guys, just to get a feel for what that's like and have some film to look back on.
Well, it's your turn. Let us know. I think we're heavily, Brenden, on the side of the majority here, Keegan Murray versus Trey Lyles, but there might be some of you out there that think that Trey Lyles should be the starter and give the rookie a little bit of time to figure out the NBA game and don't just throw him into the fire right away. It's a good argument. Let's talk about it. Again, you can reach us on Twitter at MattGeorgeSack. You can reach Brenden on Twitter, Brenden Nunes, NBA, and join the conversation there. Remember to share with us who you are picking for that starting 4 spot, Keegan Murray or Trey Lyles. Share with us your arguments for or against either of those guys. We'd love to respond to that. In addition to Twitter, you can reach me via email, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or you can respond on in the YouTube comment section down below, of course, if you're watching on YouTube. On tomorrow's Training Camp Battles episode, we're looking at something a little bit different. We're going with the third string point guard battle between Quinn Cook and Matthew Dellavedova. And it's a little more significant than you might think. So I hope you will join me for that. Until then, my name is Matt George. Thank you so much for listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.